Does anyone else feel like their brain is just fried? Like social media has just totally cooked your memory? I think all of us want to save our attention span these days. And what if the answer is something that's both good for your brain, but also good for your soul? I don't have the answer of how to fix this, but I have been thinking about ways to combat my shrinking attention span in my own life. And one of the things I came up with was memorizing scripture. Memorizing is a lost art, and when you memorize something, it's more likely to pop into your head in a moment of need. Let's see why and how you can make memorizing scripture happen. I know Brainrot is kind of a joke online, but there's also something real underneath it. A lot of us feel like it's harder to focus these days. We struggle to remember what happened last week or even last year. And we have a hard time with boredom and silence. We're consuming hundreds of pieces of fragmented information every day and then swiping away the second it starts to get boring. Researchers have actually talked about this idea of a fragmented attention, and it actually is a real thing. Our attention spans are getting shorter. It's harder for us to stay focused than it used to be. And I don't say this to be dramatic, and I'm not anti-technology, but with so much distraction, after a while it becomes difficult to slow down and think deeply enough about anything, and that includes scripture. I think that's part of why memorizing scripture feels harder than it did years ago. Memorization is something that requires sustained effort, repetition, slowing down, meditation, which is why a practice like memorizing scripture feels so different from what we do every day. It slows us down, it anchors us, and it gives our mind somewhere stable to return to. Algorithms are competing for your attention every single day, and trying to memorize a scripture is one way of trying to intentionally take it back. In addition, I also think it helps combat another evil. We've all felt that sick feeling after scrolling for a while, and when you finally close it down, you feel like you're not a good enough mom, you're not making enough money, and your house doesn't look pretty enough. And if you spend enough time scrolling, that kind of thinking becomes your internal dialogue, especially if you don't have something to cut through it. So memorizing scripture is something that can help you cut through the noise and bring you back to what actually matters. When you're in a tough situation, what are the thoughts that are going to come back to you? I was asking my sisters about this, and one of my sisters told me about a time when she was going through a miscarriage. And a comforting line that kept coming back to her was the scriptural phrase, "so that he may know how to succor his people." And another one of my sisters told about when she was a missionary, the phrase, "I will go before your face, I will be on your right hand and on your left," would come to her on really tough days. And recently in my own life, when I was feeling forgotten about by God, the phrase, "I have graven you upon the palms of my hands," brought me a lot of peace and comfort. Because whatever gets planted deeply in us is going to rise to the surface during hard moments. And this is where I started thinking differently about memorizing scripture. Memorizing has gotten a bad rap over the years in the education circles. It's a really low-level way of learning, and you don't really internalize the principles you learn when you memorize something. Most schools have given up on memorization or only teach it to very young children. But I think memorizing scripture might be just what we need to combat brain rot. It requires focused attention, and it makes you struggle through boredom. And it's going to rewire the thoughts in your brain to think positive and good thoughts over self-criticism and comparison. So memorizing scripture is more like a survival skill nowadays, because the world is constantly trying to shape the way that we think. And memorizing scripture is one way to intentionally shaping our minds around truth instead. Something that is actually really fascinating with memorization is that it physically affects your brain. Studies on memory and learning shows that repetition strengthens neural pathways, meaning the more often we think about and rehearse something, the easier it becomes for our brain to be able to access it later. And they did a study with chess players and found this to be true. Chess players who have memorized different moves, different positions on the board, when they get into tough situations, they're able to recall these positions and use them when actually playing the game. Researchers sometimes describe it as a well-worn path. The more frequently you walk it, the stronger and more automatic it becomes. And I think that matters spiritually too. Because if we're constantly rehearsing fear and insecurity and outrage and negativity, those thought patterns are going to be easier to return to. But if we repeatedly return to truth and peace and hope and scripture, those pathways become stronger too. Which makes the verse about renewing your mind incredibly practical. There's also a reason affirmations and meditation are talked about so much in psychology. I've even talked about it on this channel. It really is life-changing to have a practice that forces you to slow down and just be still for a few minutes, because that is so rare in our world today. And repeated thoughts affect us. What we rehearse mentally really matters. Psychologists have found that the things that we tell ourselves can influence our mood, our stress levels, and thought patterns. But scriptural meditation is different because it's not just positive thinking. It's anchoring yourself to truth. The Bible talks about renewing your mind. And I was actually reading earlier this week in Joshua where he talks about meditating on the word day and night. For the past few months, I've been memorizing Psalm 23. And it has been so life-giving. Sometimes when I repeat it to myself, I just start crying, thinking about how beautiful these promises are. It's so good to just slow down and think about words for a few minutes. It's just not something we do anymore. It feels very different from the constant stimulation most of us experience online every day. Social media trains us to constantly switch our attention, and memorizing scripture requires sustained attention. The same slowing down and returning in your mind to something intentionally. I think Christians understood this long before modern conversations about mindfulness and mental health started to become popular. What fills your mind eventually shapes you. And when life gets hard, you don't rise to the level of your emotions. You return to whatever has been deeply planted inside of you. That's why memorizing scripture matters. Not so you can impress people, not so you can win arguments, but so that when you're anxious, discouraged, grieving, tempted, lonely, you actually have truth to hold on to. So without further ado, let's talk about how you actually memorize scripture. When I decided I wanted to try and memorize Psalm 23, I decided to make it the lock screen on my phone. And I really liked that. It was cool to have that reminder constantly anytime I opened my phone. And as a bonus, anytime one of my kids needed to use my phone for something, they would try and quiz me and see if I was actually memorizing it. But I found I wasn't making a ton of progress. And then I watched this great video, which I'll link below, where he gives a process for memorizing scripture. He talked about just reading the scripture a bunch of times in a row each day for several days in a row. And that really made a huge difference for me. I actually tried it for several days in a row and I was able to memorize it. One day I was taking my daughter to a field trip and we had a long bus ride and I just repeated the scripture over and over in my mind and I was eventually able to memorize it. But memorizing scripture isn't really about collecting information. It's about forming your thought patterns, slowly training your mind to return to truth instead of panic, comparison, or fear. Our minds are constantly being shaped by something. Algorithm, trends, advertising, comparison. You've heard that old saying that you are the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Why can't one of those 5 people be scripture? Elder Richard G. Scott is famous for saying, "To memorize a scripture is to forge a new friendship. It's like discovering a new individual who can help in time of need, give inspiration and comfort, and be a source of motivation for needed change." And so lately I've been asking myself, who or what do I actually want living in my mind? Because my brain is going to be focusing on something anyway. And I want it to be truth. I want something deeper than the internet noise available to me when things get hard. So if your attention span feels fried, if your mind feels overwhelmed, maybe scripture isn't just an old spiritual discipline. Maybe it's something we desperately need again. Let me know if you have any verses that have really stuck with you during difficult seasons. I was asking my family about this and I was so touched to hear about their experiences they had with scriptures when they were having difficult times. So I would love to hear some more stories like that. If you have one, please share it in the comments so we can all be uplifted by it. I'm actually going to end this video by reciting Psalm 23 for you. And if you found this video helpful, please go and check out my older video where I talked about meditation. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I really loved sitting down and talking to you about this, and I hope to see you in the next one.